From the 11 Alive studios, this is The Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Good Sunday morning and welcome in. Faith is on assignment this week. And this Sunday morning, we have new comments about the ongoing conversations to end the partial government shutdown. We've seen the fallout at airports across the country, especially right here in Georgia at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport here in Atlanta. TSA agents who have been going without paychecks and long security lines. Late Thursday night, the U.S. Senate approved a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security, but without new funding for immigration enforcement. The Senate approved the bill and then adjourned for a 2-week break. Saturday morning, at an annual Military Service Academy Day at Dobbins Air Reserve Base, Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff talked about the Senate vote to fund TSA.
We reached a bipartisan agreement, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate passing a bill to pay TSA. And the House's refusal to pass this legislation is, I think, a selfish and destructive act.
Then Friday night, the House passed its own version, a short-term funding bill for all of DHS.
On this vote, the yeas are 213 and the nays are 203.
We also talked with Republican Congressman Rich McCormick. Here's his take on the latest developments with the shutdown and with TSA.
We just passed a CR.
Sure.
His turn, bang. They knocked it over us and say, we want this. We didn't like it. We're like, no, we'll do continuing resolution, which is funding it exactly the way it has been. By the way, we did several continuing resolutions when we didn't have the presidency. We didn't shut down the government. We did CRs. We gave each other time to negotiate. We funded it like it was before. That's what we do. When you say, no, I won't accept that, well, we'll see what the Senate has to do. But that's unprecedented. What they've done in the last 3 years is unprecedented.
President Trump also signed an order directing DHS to pay TSA employees who missed paychecks during the shutdown. A DHS spokesperson said checks could arrive as early as Monday. We are about to begin the final week of the state legislative session. The last day, known as Sine Die, is Thursday, and we are seeing a lot of movement under the Gold Dome in this closing stretch. One development this past week, a bill to keep high school students off of their cell phones during the school hours. It's now headed to the governor's desk. Just last year, Governor Brian Kemp signed a cell phone ban into law for public school students grades K through 8. This new bill extends that ban all the way through grade 12. Backers of the cell phone ban said teachers were among the strongest supporters of the proposal.
Let's just ban the smartphone from bell to bell so that kids can learn what it feels like to not have that distraction, to not have that extra stress and anxiety, so their brains can be open to 100% pure learning.
That a cell phone ban is the best thing for our children's safety. It is the best thing for their mental well-being. It is the best thing for their mental health.
But some senators said the proposed ban was too harsh and that it took discretion away from public school systems.
Phones are absolutely just a part of our culture, and for us to just blindly ban them, to give them no access, ultimately I don't think that it's realistic.
An effort to soften the bill would have given school systems greater leeway to enforce cell phone use. That amendment failed. In the end, the cell phone bill passed the Senate unanimously. And there is a lot of talk every year about daylight saving time. That conversation, it is also happening under the Gold Dome. We're tracking a bill that could put Georgia on permanent daylight saving time. And it has traction thanks to some fast dealing among lawmakers. Doug Richards looks at how it evolved.
If enacted, House Bill 154 would effectively put Georgia permanently on daylight saving time, eliminating twice-a-year time changes.
We have to ask if a policy that disrupts nearly every family in this state and no one can clearly defend it, why are we still doing it?
But before HB 154 became a time zone bill, It had been an ambulance bill. It passed the State House last year, designating ambulance services as essential, introduced by a new House member, Gary Richardson.
EMS workers are the only emergency public safety employees in the state that are not considered essential.
More than a year ago, Richardson's ambulance bill passed the House unanimously, but then the state Senate got hold of it. The record shows senators briefly pondered changing the bill to prohibit puberty blocker treatments for children. Then the Senate stripped the ambulance language and named it the Georgia Sunshine Protection Act, switching the state from the Eastern time zone to the Atlantic time zone 1 hour ahead.
I think that's the season we're in the legislature.
Richardson says that he's unoffended that his bill, passed unanimously in the House, became unrecognizable in the Senate.
What might look like one thing, once you see it again, may not look like that at all.
Yet what's good for changing the clock may also be good for ambulances. Richardson says he thinks he has found another bill that he can use to deliver the bill's language.
So I still feel confident that we're going to get EMS as an essential service over the finish line this year.
The finish line is next week. In order to actually get enacted, the mutated Sunshine Bill would need approval not only again from the House, but the governor and from the U.S. Department of Transportation. At the Capitol, Doug Richards, 11 Alive News.
Always a lot to talk about. It is time now for our Politics Roundtable. Joining us today, we have Democratic strategist Howard Franklin. He leads the consulting firm Ohio River South. He's worked on campaigns throughout the Southeast, including the 2021 campaign for Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. And joining us, Stephen Lawson, a Republican communications strategist who has served as a senior communications advisor to House Speaker John Burns. He's also worked for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and Congressman Mike Collins. I know both of you have spent a lot of time at the state capitol throughout this session. Howard, let's start with you. What outstanding business do the legislators still have that you are watching as we get up to this final stretch here?
Yeah, with just a week left, I think the big issue that everyone's paying some attention to is tax reform and whether or not the Speaker and leaders in the House have their way and are able to roll back some of the cost of property tax reform effectively, or if the Lieutenant Governor, members of the Senate leadership, are able to cut down on some of the personal income tax. And I think there's a lot of discussion and also a lot of fallout for some of the unintended sort of losers that could potentially lose out on some revenue if one proposal is enacted over another.
Stephen, let's get a Republican's perspective on this. And I reckon we may want to spend a little bit of time on the tax conversation because it has been one of the big drivers of this session.
Yeah, Howard mentioned the tax conversation. You've got the House's property tax proposal, the Lieutenant Governor, the Senate's income tax proposal. But there are a flurry of things still outstanding. We've got insurance reform. We've got a number of education bills, including the Speaker's priority literacy bill that has hit some snags in the state Senate. But we've got a school safety bill. We've got cursive making its way back into the classroom. So a whole host of things. And we've got this hot potato election bill, this back and forth between the Senate and the House. We're getting to the last week of session. What's up is down and what's down is up. And you never know how it's going to turn out.
I think a lot of people watching here, the idea of perhaps having a lower tax burden, and that sounds good to everybody in theory. In Georgia, you've got to balance the budget. So if you cut revenue coming in, you got to balance it out somehow. For Democrats, where do they stand on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's transpired the last couple of weeks is Democrats standing up for school systems, for local county governments and cities who do depend very heavily on property tax. And I know that, I think that of the two proposals that were floated by leaders in either chamber, I think that one had gotten some traction, but ultimately when advocates for cities and school systems had said, hey, you're going to blow a hole into our budget. You're going to make it impossible for us to collect these lost taxes, et cetera, these other specialized taxes that were approved by voters at ballot box or via referendum. I think that is something that slowed a lot of the movement and momentum for that bill down.
But Stephen, there still is a lot of momentum, a lot of enthusiasm in the Republican caucus in both the House and the Senate about these proposals to cut taxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got the Senate on the one hand that has long advocated, including the Lieutenant Governor, for eventually eliminating the state income tax, taking a big cut at it. You've had the House Speaker really want to roll back property taxes. They've continued to talk about that. We talked about at the beginning of session how important it was politically for Republicans to get something done in both of these areas. I think that maintains the case. I think what you will ultimately see is a gradual reduction, a more accelerated reduction in the income tax to potentially 4%, and then some meaningful property tax relief. I think Republicans across the Gold Dome who are running for higher office understand the importance of delivering on these affordability issues.
And politics is always in the background when we're talking about what's happening under the Gold Dome. It's not just, pure legislating. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about this election bill, these election proposals. I know both of you have been tracking. Howard, let's start with you. What do people need to know about some of these proposals coming through the legislature right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that is front and center for the elections reform bills is really a question of how much time we have to actually implement. And I think many of the lawmakers who have said we should pump the brakes and we should allow for more time are basically looking at the calendar and looking and suggested, several of them have suggested that we pick a year that does not have as many contests on the ballot to be able to give these elections directors. And what people really don't understand, oftentimes we look at the Secretary of State and say, hey, that's the guy running the state's elections. But actually, you've got elections directors in all 159 counties who are really running elections with a different degree of resource in every county.
And we're short on time, but Stephen, there's a deadline that is fast approaching that lawmakers have to account for here, right?
Yeah, the legislature a couple years ago passed a bill to eliminate the QR codes on the ballot and set July 1 of this year as the deadline to do that. They have yet to back up that deadline. There are competing proposals on how to do that, but if they don't do it in time, they could go to a legal challenge.
A lot to figure out, not a lot of time to do it. We're out of time right now. We'll be right back with much more of the Georgia Vote just after this. Penny Brown Reynolds is making her case for Georgia Secretary of State. She's pitching herself as an experienced, steady hand at a time when election confidence is under the microscope. The former Fulton County judge says her legal and executive background sets her apart, even without statewide elected experience, as she enters an already crowded Democratic primary field. Faith Jesse sat down with her this week.
Why do you want to be Secretary of State for Georgia?
Well, I'm going to be Secretary of State because now more than ever, I believe Georgia needs sound, steady leadership. I bring experience, expertise, and education. I've run a federal agency that was challenged. I am the only candidate in the race who's taken an oath to the Constitution as a judge. And so we know that the Secretary of State's office is the chief elections officer in Georgia. And who better to run and oversee our elections, particularly at a time when they're being undermined, than a former judge. Not only that, I have the expertise as a CEO and an entrepreneur, and I have a heart for the people. And I believe more than ever I have the integrity, the leadership experience to be the next Secretary of State, and I believe I'm going to do that.
Day one, what are you doing? What's your priority?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do day one is to keep every promise that I've made. And the promises that I've made is that I'm going to bring a sense of integrity. In honesty, this should be a position that's nonpartisan. Because I think in the long run, when we talk about fair, free, and safe elections, we're talking about people that don't care what you vote, red, blue, or even not at all. We need someone who's coming in there to not just have a job, but do a job. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do a forensic review of that entire office. Because yes, it's about voting, but guess what else the Secretary of State's office does? It regulates and registers businesses. And we know that small businesses and entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of Georgia. And I want to make certain of not just being a gatekeeper, but someone who's a partner with businesses. We also register licensing professionals. Hundreds of thousands of people, whether they're dentists or chiropractors or cosmetologists or barbers, have to get registered in this office. And that office has been failing them on so many levels. So I bring that sense of competence and an ability as a business person to go in and work that.
There was someone working under Brad Raffensperger, that's Gabriel Sterling,
yes,
who is now also running for Secretary of State. Some might look at him and say, well, he has been in this office, he has the experience. Why should voters pick you over him?
well, voters should pick me over anybody else because I'm not running against them, I'm running for the office. One of the problems with the office that we alluded to, I spoke to you about, is the fact that the licensing, we license over 700,000 professionals in this state with 40 professions. And that area of the Secretary of State's office has been terrible in how they've administered that act. Whoever was a part of that, whether it was he or whomever, have failed us. What they need to do is start answering the telephone. That's one of the things they can start doing. People expect government in some places not to work, but that office has been used as a tool to just think about voting, and I'm expanding that, just like I'm expanding the electorate. I am believing that, yes, I am the chief elections officer, but I'm also a CEO of an agency that is required to service individuals.
Brown Reynolds is one of 4 Democrats who qualified for the Secretary of State primary. She joins Adrian Consineri Jr., Fulton County Commissioner Dana Barrett, and business owner Cam Ashling. And you can find all of our election coverage online. Faith's full interview with Judge Penny Brown Reynolds is streaming right now on 11 Alive Plus. And as we get closer to the primary on May 19th, make sure you are visiting our elections page on 11alive.com for updated stories and developments on this always interesting 2026 campaign. You talk about an always interesting 2026 campaign, a good time to bring the panel back in. Let's talk about this ongoing funding challenge, let's call it, for the TSA that has been snarling travelers across the country, and particularly right here in Atlanta. It comes amid an election year. There's always a political angle to this. I want to ask each of you guys, because both parties seem to be pointing the finger at the other for the blame, which party, which candidates are more exposed to potential voter frustration as this partial government shutdown drags on? Stephen, we'll start with you.
I think they're both losers. I think people, by and large, feel like this is just another instance of Congress not doing its job, failing to act. Certainly, I understand Republican side that, hey, this is something that the Democrats have been holding up. We saw that the Republicans finally carved out DHS from this funding package, although I don't think that's a good idea at a time when we are facing war with the Middle East to not have funding for that. But I think in general, I think it's been a mess. It's a huge economic, negative. People are missing time with loved ones. I thought Delta did something really interesting this week. They basically said, hey, Congress, we're going to take away your special privileges for bypassing lines and your 24-hour customer service. I think they should do that permanently until Congress permanently carves out FAA and TSA from any future government shutdown. I think that would really get their attention.
Howard?
Yeah, I've got to disagree with my good friend Stephen here. I mean, I think a lot of what he said I completely agree with, but I think it's very clear that the Republican majority is going to bear the brunt of the responsibility for this. This feels like an extension of what we saw with National Guard or even ICE agents, descending upon major American cities, terrorizing citizens, residents, et cetera. And I mean, I've heard some of the stories from folks who've traveled in the last couple of days about having, ICE agents at these checkpoints for the TSA, and they're not helping. And the most ironic part you've got to consider here is that they are government employees who are being paid not to actually do the work, standing next to these TSA agents who are still showing up to work and not calling in sick. So I can't imagine there's going to be a winner.
And that funding for those the DHS agents on the immigration enforcement side of things, like ICE, came out of the big beautiful bill that was passed last summer. We're talking about Congress here, Stephen. There are 2 congressmen who are running for Senate. That's Buddy Carter and Mike Collins in the Republican Senate race alongside Derek Dooley. How does this factor into that race, and where does that race stand more broadly on the Republican side?
Yeah, I think it's a little too early to tell. I mean, obviously you've got both of those congressmen saying, hey, Senator Ossoff, the world's largest airport, he's been the one that is holding this up. Ossoff has pointed the finger at Donald Trump. So I think they're all finger pointing. I think that race is still kind of where it's been for months, Zach. I think it's clear that Mike Collins is in the lead in that race. I think Buddy Carter is probably in more of a distant second place, and then you've got Derek Dooley close behind.
And still no endorsement from the president.
Still no endorsement, and I think that's the wild card. I don't expect at this point the president's going to get involved. That may change, but I think what you're going to see is that Mike Collins is going to advance to a runoff, and I think the question is who is going to be in second place heading into the runoff? Is it Buddy Carter or Derek DeWolf?
In 30 seconds, Howard, Senator Ossoff is watching all this play out and raising a lot of money.
Absolutely. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. The fact that you have to go to a June 16th runoff is not good for the Republican Party, and putting up a challenger who can unite the Republican Party behind him or her, and also define him or herself statewide, not just from a single congressional district, because we've got 14, in a way that would get people excited about
and
their
I
candidacy.
completely agree with that.
We always find a little agreement on the Georgia Vote Roundtable. We're short on time here. We'll be right back with much more after this. The partial government shutdown and the frustration of flyers at overstressed airports across the country, it is also a topic of conversation in a key special election in Northwest Georgia. The 14th congressional district race is down to two candidates, Republican Clay Fuller and Democrat Sean Harris. The runoff election is 1 week from Tuesday, and the winner will take former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's spot as the district's representative in Washington. During a recent debate in Atlanta, both candidates were asked about President Trump's decision to deploy ICE agents at several U.S. airports, including Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson.
This is a Democrat shutdown. This is necessary because of a decision by Chuck Schumer, who's trying to hold on by dear life to the minority leader position. This is clearly the Democrat Party and Mr. Harris putting illegal immigrants first and Americans last, and you're seeing that in the lines at the Atlanta airport.
ICE needs to go back to the border. ICE needs to follow the rules that they actually supposed to be following with their core mission. The reality of it is this. What we need to do as Democrats and Republicans, we need to reach across the aisle, get this figured out, and make sure that we can pay everybody across the board.
Early voting in this runoff race, it begins tomorrow. The 14th district includes parts of 10 Georgia counties, stretching from Cobb all the way to Dade on the Alabama and Tennessee border. Stay with us. We'll be right back with our Voice of the Voter. Well, we continue to welcome all of you to share your concerns and your thoughts on Georgia politics, because after all, you can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. This morning, we hear from Holly Rodriguez in College Park.
Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Rodriguez. I live in the wonderful city of College Park, Georgia. I own an urban farm. The name of my farm is Sugar's Urban Farm, where we teach the community. The issue I think that is pressing with politics today is they're overworked. They have so much coming at them on a daily basis, and they have very minimal help. So I would challenge the constituents to come out and help your politicians. What I'm most concerned about in daily life is just mental health and mental wellness. I want us to live a good life. I want people to be healthier and just be able to know that it's okay to talk to someone about your problems. I want people to see that they're not alone. I'm extremely optimistic and hopeful that we will come together, we will unify, we will heal each other, we will love on each other, and we will start reporting the good stuff.
And a big thank you to Holly and everybody who has shared their perspective with us for almost 2 years of this program. We hope you might be the next person to do so. And we thank you for watching us today. We hope to see you right back here again next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.